Hi, this is Rick from For Community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. I'm going to start with a story about me buying a new Christmas tree this year. I was walking through Canadian Tire in October and I noticed that they had their Christmas tree displays up, so I went over and looked at it. It was actually set up within the same area as their Halloween display. So beside the Christmas trees were flying skeletons to be hung outside on hooks. And beside the tree ornaments were spooky Halloween candy holders and spooky noisemakers. The store has one location for special events, so they just clutter the place up and mismatch everything. Some guy was looking at me, looking at trees, while I was looking at him, looking at the floating skeletons, and he says out loud, as if simply speaking to the air, "Can you believe how some people fall into the marketing? We're shopping for Halloween and there are trees up." He spoke that out loud with his mouth aimed in my general direction while not making eye contact, certainly loud enough for more than just me to hear, totally gaslighting me, not taking responsibility as though he's trying to do something bad or escalate someone, just gaslighting. Very happy to say that I did not escalate because I didn't actually care, mainly because his story isn't my story. I can't own his story. I can only own my story. And I have been through this almost every single year as a parent. I got 4 kids. People who have less kids have no idea how much work is involved in planning anything for 4 kids. They just don't get it. So I've had to let a lot of people give me their parenting comments, and I've just had to let them fall by the wayside because that's not my story. That's their story. I got 4 kids, not 2, not 3, not 1. My point is that I've got my own story to own, and I can't expect anyone else to own my story. They can only own their story, and I can't own their story. I can only own my story. Okay, what about you? Have you ever been gaslighted for something that has to do with Christmas? And maybe you put your tree up too early or too late, or you bought too many presents, or you didn't buy enough, or you went to too many parties, or you didn't go to enough parties. I mean, come on, the number of things we can be criticized for is absolutely endless. If you have a story about someone trying to gaslight you around Christmas and you remember your response, please pause the video and share your story with somebody else. This video is based on my interpretation of Luke chapter 1, verses 26 to 31, and also verse 38. In this story, we see an example of someone who keeps their composure, doesn't escalate, and really has a good sense of what's hers to own. Let's look about this first story about Mary from the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 1, verse 26 to 31, and verse 38, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Gabriel appeared to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you." Confused and disturbed, Mary tried to think what the angel could mean. "Don't be afraid, Mary," the angel told her, "for you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son. You will name him Jesus." Verse 38, Mary responded, "I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true."
You shall not pass.
Why?
Because you kids need to watch Connect HQ.
We already did, see?
Oh yeah, you did. Good job.
You may cross the path.
Good thing we watched Connect HQ.
Yeah.
Here's a question that I'd like you to take with you when this video is done to help you stay grounded. The question is, what's mine to own? Or if I were asking you that, I would say, what's yours to own? I have seen many people escalating or fretting over things that they have no personal responsibility for. But I get it, because often it's parents fretting over children's decisions or a spouse fretting over their spouse's decisions. People sometimes try to control outcome. but they're controlling outcome for their kids or their spouse and not for themselves. I see so much stress that people can carry around the idea that they're trying to take responsibility for something that they have totally no responsibility for. What's mine to own is an awesome question to reduce stress, better manage schedules, and remain grounded. In this story, I see two parts around this idea of ownership. I see God in this story, and I see Mary in this story. So, around the idea behind the question, what's mine to own, I'm going to look at the two parts that I see in this first Christmas story for this season. First, let's start right here. What is God's to own? The text says she was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. It also says, you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son. You will name him Jesus. The first thing that is so obvious to me, this thing that's jumping out in the text to me, is the idea that this isn't actually Mary's story. I mean, Mary's a big part of this. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Mary's not important. I'm saying that Mary's not the main character in the story. It's not Mary's story. The main character in the story is actually God. This is God's story. It's not Mary's story. From my perspective, just to help you understand how I'm seeing it, my context, this is a story that has similarities with the story about the calling of Abraham and Moses. I'm just going to digress just a little bit here. There was nothing special about Abraham or Moses to make God select them over anyone else. The point in those two stories is that they were just normal humans who had huge character flaws just like we all do. But because God wanted to extend grace and mercy and show his love for us, he brought those two guys into his story and used them to show us all that he loves us. Here's the big idea behind this. God loves his creation, which includes you. Before the beginning of creation, God crafted a story, his story, and has brought all of us into it. It's a story of his love and us getting connected with him forever. In a very brief summary, that's his story. So here's Mary. It's not Mary's story. It's God's story. But here's Mary. She's engaged to Joseph, which is a reminder for us about a part in the Old Testament where God has this big story that includes a theme that he's sending someone in the world with the intent to connect people and God together. The text also says she's to name her baby Jesus, which is something we look back to as a point of reference, knowing that this is actually God himself who has come to the world. Mary finds herself in a crucial moment of God's story. God crafted a story before he crafted any of us and any of this world. That story included his coming to the world to be among us and us to be with him. And Mary marks a peak in the story arc. The story is progressing significantly here, and Mary is a big part of God's story at this point. Now let's pause here just for a moment and talk about you. Just like Mary's story isn't about Mary, it's about God, that's also true for you. Your life isn't just about you. It's also about God. God crafted you and has a plan for you to be a part of his big story for all of creation. And in that story, God has a desire for you to take part in it as his friend. You are also in God's story, and God is inviting you to play a bigger part in it by acknowledging your connection with Jesus in his story, just like Mary was called to. Now, I don't mean to take all the focus completely off of Mary, because that'd be wrong. Clearly, she's in the story, and she's a big part of it. So here's my second point. What's mine to own? The text says, I'm the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. So, yes, Mary's story is also about Mary. God's the main character, but Mary is clearly in this too. She's not a puppet. She has full autonomy to live her life as she wants to live it. And as we get to this part of God's story, Mary is invited to play a significant part in it. The biggest part of Mary's story that I love here is her response at the end of this passage. I love it because of both what it isn't and what it is. So what isn't Mary's response? What I see sometimes when people are faced with a big thing like this, when they are forced into somebody else's story, when they're brought into a bigger story and almost lose their own, they may feel overwhelmed. They may express anxiety. Some do a lot of catastrophizing about what the future might be. Their amygdala kicks in and they go straight to their fight, flee, freeze mode or tend and befriend. When something big, someone else's story, is thrust upon a person, they tend not to act with valor. They tend to react, act out, act in ways that demonstrate a low sense of self-control. They tend to let their emotions decide for them how to act. But not Mary. She stays grounded. So what does that mean? This is God's story, not Mary's story, but Mary makes this her story too. She doesn't push him away. She takes ownership. She does not take ownership over God's story. She can't own that. She takes ownership of herself in God's story. And how does she do that? Where others may react in ways we just wouldn't want to witness. How does Mary do this? She's just doing one thing. She's taking ownership exclusively for herself. And I think she's asking herself this one question: what is mine to own? If I know what my part is, Mary might be saying to herself, everything else is going to take care of itself because it's God's story, not my story. I just have to own my own small part to play in this. So I think she's asking herself, what's mine to own? And she's taking personal ownership over her part in God's story. Now, you also have been invited to take part in God's story. And very similar to Mary, your part has a lot to do with what you will do with the message about Jesus. You can, as Mary did, respond by taking ownership. Now, I don't mean by taking ownership of God's story, because lots of people try to do that. For example, people say, let's stop calling it Christmas. Let's call it Happy Holidays. Let's deny that God ever came to the earth. Let's take all references of God out of every public thing. There's a lot of ways we try to take control of God's story. Mary, however, didn't attempt to take ownership over God's story. She chose to take ownership over her own story. She chose to respond to Jesus with personal responsibility. Now, if you're a Jesus follower, then Mary's story is also your story. You are among those who have, metaphorically speaking, been presented with the message of Jesus by the angel Gabriel, and you have responded by taking personal responsibility for yourself, your story, within God's bigger story. Well done. If you have not yet come to follow Jesus, then can I encourage you to think about it like this? What is yours to own? God's asking you to have a part in his story, a story where he receives people into friendship with him, which starts with their belief in Jesus. What is yours to own? What will you do about the message about Jesus? Okay, that's it from me to you for now. Would you please like? Would you please share? Would you please subscribe? Would you please ask for the link? We meet 2 times this Sunday, both on Zoom, 10:30, 6 o'clock. We're also doing communion this week, so come out and find out how we do our special brand of communion, which is awesome. If you'd like to contribute, you can see the link for it down in the show notes. For community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. See you next time.